That's what Karen Whitfield, the HOA president and self-declared queen of Willow Rest Heights, screamed at 7 a.m. while standing in front of my ranch's entrance, completely losing it. There she was, right in front of my brick-red gate, face flushed, trembling with rage, screaming something about community color violations. Gates must be beige or white, $5,000 fine, she barked like it was a national emergency. She was waving the citation like a lunatic, bouncing on her heels like a toddler mid-meltdown, and dragging along her 3 loyal lackeys, armed with cameras, to document evidence. Karen was having a full-blown breakdown over the color of a gate. What she didn't know. She was standing in the wrong spot. I was on my tractor, engine already rumbling. She hadn't noticed me. Not yet. But I'd noticed her. I'd noticed everything. And today, I was done. She didn't expect that this morning, this tractor would move forward. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this HOA horror show? It gets so much worse. Let me rewind a bit. My name's Tom Sullivan, and I've lived on this 20-acre farm for 10 years now. My grandfather left it to me in his will, and I've kept it running ever since. The property sits on the edge of what used to be open farmland, until developers rolled in about 15 years ago and started dropping McMansions like Monopoly pieces. 5 years ago, the HOA was formed. And guess who slithered into the presidency? Yep, Karen Whitfield, a woman who ran on a platform of community beautification and standardization. What that really meant was bending the neighborhood into her personal beige fantasy land, where individuality was a punishable offense. That morning started like any other. I was feeding my chickens, sipping my coffee, when I heard that snarling purr of a white Mercedes. Karen. She wasn't alone. As usual, she had her 3 HOA board members in tow, her personal paparazzi. She stepped out wearing her signature power suit, the same one she probably bought when she was still an insurance manager, before her husband left her for someone half her age and the company quietly restructured her out of a job. She clutched her clipboard like a weapon and started circling my gate like a shark that smelled blood. Mr. Sullivan, she barked, in that voice that could peel rust off an old tractor. You have 72 hours to repaint this monstrosity. The approved palette includes beige, white, or gray. She flung her arms toward the gate like she was summoning spirits. This red is in direct violation of Article 4, Section 2 of our community standards. I took another long, slow sip of my coffee and said, calmly, Karen, this farm's been here since 1952. That gate's been red for 3 generations. My grandfather painted it after returning from the war, said it reminded him of the barn back in Ireland where he grew up. Karen scoffed. I don't care if your gate was painted by Betsy Ross herself, she snapped, flipping through her clipboard like it was a holy manuscript. The rules are the rules. You are not exempt. I just smiled. You're welcome to take me to court, Karen. Her face turned a deep plum. A vein in her temple throbbed so hard I thought it might pop. You'll regret this attitude, Sullivan. I have more power than you think. And just as she turned to leave, she added, with that signature smirk, oh, and I'll also be reporting your chickens. Keeping livestock in a residential zone? That's a violation of Ordinance 7.3. Her tires screeched as she sped away. I stood there, coffee still in hand, watching my Rhode Island Reds peck happily in the dirt, descendants of the very same flock my grandfather raised. To me, they were family. To Karen, they were violations. Then my phone buzzed. Unknown number, she won't stop there. There's someone behind her. I stared at the message. Who sent it? What did they mean? Little did I know, that was just the first shot in what would become an all-out war for the soul of our community. That evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun sink behind the hills, painting the sky the same rich red as our gate. I thought about my grandfather, his old calloused hands painting that gate as a symbol of independence. This gate means we don't fold. We stand firm, he'd say. I could hear my neighbor, Carlos Rodriguez, tinkering in his auto shop next door. He'd been fined $2,000 last year by Karen for leaving a car in his driveway while his wife was in labor. Karen said it was unsightly. The woman had no soul. As I looked at my gate, my chickens, my land, I made a decision. Karen had her HOA. But I had something she'd never understand. A community. And they were getting sick of her tyranny. I just didn't know how sick, or how far Karen would go to enforce her perfect beige empire. The next morning, I called David Bradley, an old buddy from college who'd become a big-shot lawyer in Austin. I told him the whole story. He actually laughed. Tom, your farm predates the HOA by decades. You're grandfathered in. She can't legally enforce any of that. You're exempt from their regulations. Sounded great in theory. But Karen Whitfield didn't let things like facts or laws stop her. And I was right to be worried. For the next 3 days, my mailbox turned into a war zone. Gate painted incorrect color, $500. Unauthorized livestock, $1,000. Grass over 4 inches, $200. Fence in deteriorating condition, $750. Farm equipment in unapproved color, tractors must be neutral tones, $400. And my favorite, eggs not certified by HOA Organic Committee, $250. By the time I tallied everything up, she'd racked up over $5,000 in fines. All because I dared to defy the Queen of Beige. But what Karen didn't know, I wasn't going down quietly. Because if she wanted a war, she just declared it on the wrong man. $8,450. That's how much the HOA claimed I owed in fines. For violations I was pretty sure Karen just made up out of thin air. The level of detail in her citations was so absurd, it bordered on performance art. One notice claimed that my grass in the northeast quadrant of my property measured exactly 4.2 inches tall, as if she'd been out there with a ruler, a compass, and possibly a surveyor's theodolite. Another alleged that my rooster's crow exceeded the neighborhood decibel limit, complete with a poorly photoshopped soundwave chart that looked like it was stolen from a middle school science fair. But the crown jewel of Karen's insanity? A citation claiming my mailbox post was made of inappropriately expressive wood grain, which, get this, was disruptive to the visual aesthetic harmony of Willow Rest Heights. I laughed so hard I nearly fell off my porch. That mailbox had stood there for 30 years, longer than most of the houses on the block. But after the laughter came resolve. I spent the next day taking photos of every violation and comparing them to the actual HOA bylaws, which I downloaded from the county website. And guess what? 90% of the rules she cited didn't exist. Not a single word about gate colors. No mention of chickens. No restrictions on mailbox posts, rooster crowing, or tractor parking. The real bylaws were bland and basic, stuff about not leaving garbage out, keeping the noise down after 10 p.m., and maintaining your lawn. Karen was just making up rules, assuming I'd be too dumb, too scared, or too lazy to fact-check her. But I wasn't just any homeowner. She'd picked the wrong farmer to harass. The next HOA meeting was held at the Willow Rest Community Center. Usually, these meetings were ghost towns, 5 people, lukewarm coffee, and Karen talking to herself. But that night? The place was packed. Word had spread. Karen sat at the head of the table like a queen holding court, practically glowing with self-importance. When she got to new business, she barely hid her glee. She stood up, straightened her blazer, and launched into one of her signature fear-mongering speeches. Some people, she said, locking eyes with me, believe they're above the rules. That the rest of us must suffer while they flaunt violations left and right, lowering our property values. That's when I stood up. Madam President, I said, calmly, I'd like to address those alleged violations. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a fat, tabbed folder. What I have here is the official HOA charter, from 2019. Funny thing? I couldn't find a single mention of gate colors, livestock bans, or mailbox wood grain patterns. So I'm just wondering, Miss Whitfield. I flipped to a page and held it up. Where exactly did these rules come from? Silence. Karen blinked. Her face went from red to white to red again. Those are, new amendments. Passed by the board. I nodded. Then I'd like to see the meeting minutes where those amendments were approved. Karen started flipping through papers like a gambler looking for a winning hand. I don't have them with me right now. That's when Judge Harold Thompson, who'd sat quietly through every meeting for 5 years, finally spoke. In a voice that could still silence a courtroom, he said, I'd like to see those minutes too, Karen. As one of the founding members of this HOA, I don't recall voting on any such amendments. In fact, he narrowed his eyes, I don't recall any board meetings where these were discussed. The crowd stirred. Dorothy Mills, usually Karen's right-hand yes-woman, raised her hand. Now that you mention it, I got fined last week for my roses being the wrong shade of pink. I thought it was a joke. Carlos, my neighbor, had been live-streaming the whole meeting. His phone was blowing up with comments. Karen got exposed. Judge Thompson just obliterated her. Everyone's got a Karen. Karen banged her gavel like a toddler with a toy hammer. Order. Order. This is not, I will not be disrespected. But it was too late. The room had turned. People were standing, shouting over each other, sharing stories of their own bogus fines. The tide had shifted. The beige empire was crumbling. As the meeting broke up, Karen snatched her stack of papers with trembling hands. She stormed past me, stopping just long enough to snarl. Fine, Sullivan. You want to play lawyer? I'll show you real power. She stomped out, fuming, but not before I caught her in the parking lot, talking into her phone like a cartoon villain. No, Whiskers. Mommy's not going to let them win. We're going to show them all. Whiskers. I assumed that was her cat. Turned out, it was. And she'd finally cracked. As I stepped out into the cool night air, Judge Thompson approached me. Tom, he said quietly. Your grandfather helped me once, a long time ago. I think it's time I returned the favor. Come by my house tomorrow. There are things you need to know about Karen's leadership. I drove home that night with a sense of victory, but something told me this was just one battle in a much bigger war. And I was right. Karen's revenge began the very next morning. 5:30 a.m. sharp. I woke up to the sound of loud thumping. Jumping jacks. Right outside my gate. In hot pink spandex. Blasting early 2000s pop music. It was Karen. Grinning like a psycho Barbie. Morning, Tom, she chirped. Just getting my cardio in. Public sidewalk, you know. Totally legal. And she was right. I checked. The sidewalk was technically public property. There was nothing I could do, even if she was clearly there just to wake my roosters, annoy me, and sabotage my mornings. After a week of 5:30 a.m. torture, I decided to escalate. I set up outdoor speakers and started blasting Johnny Cash every time she showed up. Turns out, Karen hates country music. The look on her face when Folsom Prison Blues kicked in was pure art. The war got psychological. She left anonymous reviews on every farming website she could find, claiming my eggs were contaminated and my produce unsanitary. She called every government agency you can imagine, the zoning board, animal control, even the FDA. One day, a confused inspector from the Food and Drug Administration showed up. Someone reported you for running an unlicensed egg processing facility, he said, looking around at my 6 chickens. Then he laughed, bought 2 dozen eggs, and said, someone really hates you. Even the inspectors were rooting for me. But she wasn't done. She had a pest control company spray chemicals right along our shared fence, always timing it perfectly, right when my chickens were feeding. She mailed me a book titled, How to Be a Good Neighbor, with the passive-aggressive highlights already marked. Then came the big one. She sued me. A civil suit, claiming my farm was a public nuisance, a source of noise pollution, and an aesthetic blight. She even held a press conference on the community center steps, claiming to represent 73% of residents who want the Sullivan farm gone. Carlos interrupted her mid-sentence. I did an actual survey, he said. 5 people support her. Including herself. Karen's response? Silence equals consent. Even the local news crew covering it seemed more entertained than alarmed. Then one night, a cold, rainy night, about 2 weeks into the madness, I saw it. Karen's white Mercedes. Parked outside my property. Engine off. Lights off. Just sitting there. Watching. His voice carrying the authority of 4 decades on the bench. No, Karen, Judge Thompson said, stepping forward, spine straight despite his age. You set yourself up. I just made sure the truth came to light. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen stood frozen, her carefully manicured image collapsing in real time. The woman who once ruled with citations and fear now looked cornered, exposed, and very much alone. Someone in the back of the room started clapping. Then another. Within seconds, the entire room was on its feet, a wave of applause crashing down on the woman who had tormented us all. Karen backed away from the projector, stammering. This is all taken out of context. That video is edited. You're all just. Save it, Carlos called out. We heard you. We saw you. The only thing out of context is how you ever got this job in the first place. That line got a cheer. She made one last desperate grab for her gavel, slamming it down like she could claw her authority back through brute noise. I am still the HOA president. This meeting is illegal. You people are breaking the rules. That's when Dorothy Mills, ever polite, ever restrained, walked up and plucked the gavel from Karen's hand like she was taking a toy from a child. No, Karen, she said, voice cool. You're suspended pending investigation. Effective immediately. The fallout was immediate. By the next morning, the video had gone viral, not just locally, but nationally. A story about an HOA tyrant being exposed for corruption, manipulation, and conspiracy? People couldn't click fast enough. News vans lined the neighborhood. Journalists called the Red Gate Festival the spirit of small-town resistance. And just like that, Karen Whitfield became the internet's most infamous HOA dictator. She resigned officially 2 days later, citing mental health concerns, though we all knew it was just an attempt to get ahead of the lawsuits. Because, oh yes, the lawsuits came. The state attorney general launched a full investigation. Sunrise Development was subpoenaed for collusion with Karen. And the IRS? Well, Turns out misusing nonprofit HOA funds for personal shopping sprees is very illegal. The HOA board was restructured. Judge Thompson was unanimously elected as interim president. His first order of business? Formally restoring the Sullivan Gate as a historical landmark. A week later, the community gathered at my property again. This time, to rebuild. Carlos brought his tools. The woodworker who had offered his services free of charge showed up with handcrafted panels. Families pitched in, some painted, some planted flowers, and the kids who once drew red gates on poster board now watched the real one rise from the ashes. We built it stronger. Redder. With a plaque at the base that read, Sullivan Gate, 1952 to 2025, torn down by tyranny, rebuilt by community. Karen moved out of Willow-Rest Heights quietly, her house listed through a proxy agent. No one saw her go. No one said goodbye. But I never forgot that night in the rain. The woman crying in her car. The bitterness, the grief, the lonely war she was fighting in her own head. And maybe, in another life, she could have been something else. Someone who grew flowers for joy, not judgment. But power has a way of warping people. And unchecked authority? It doesn't just corrupt, it erases. Not here. Not anymore. I still sit on my porch most evenings, coffee in hand, watching the sun set behind that bright red gate. Sometimes, kids from the neighborhood stop by just to look at it. To touch the wood. To ask questions. And I tell them what my grandfather told me. This gate isn't just wood and paint. It's a promise. That we don't bend for bullies. That we don't cave to fear. That no matter how many times they try to knock us down, we stand back up. That night, under the light of a full moon, we met at the edge of my property. Carlos, Judge Thompson, Dorothy, and a few others. We weren't vigilantes, we were neighbors, tired of watching the law protect the powerful while ignoring the damage they left behind. Carlos rolled out a hand-drawn map of the neighborhood. She set up camp just past the South Fire Road entrance. If she blocks that again, emergency services can't get through. That gives us grounds. Judge Thompson nodded. And I've spoken with a friend at the county. There's an old easement through the backwoods that gives public right-of-way access. We have options. I looked down at the map, then up at the people around me, folks who had once been strangers, now comrades in a quiet rebellion. Let's give Karen a taste of her own rules, I said. The next morning, we got to work. We filed official complaints. Created a website archiving every fake violation, every abuse of power, every lie. Carlos even printed flyers that read, Don't sell. Don't settle. We fight together. We began holding weekly community forums, not HOA meetings, but public gatherings where people could speak without fear. We helped seniors appeal their fines, raised money for legal defenses, and coordinated with journalists now watching Karen's every move like hawks. And we waited. Waited for her to make one more mistake. It came sooner than we thought. Karen tried to buy off a neighbor, a widow named Mrs. Keating, offering her double the value of her home if she sold before the end of the month. But what Karen didn't know was that Mrs. Keating had already signed on as part of our class action lawsuit. We had her recorded. Voice clear. Bribery blatant. It was the final nail in the coffin. 2 weeks later, Rebecca Whitfield Chen, Karen's sister, was named in a federal indictment for conspiracy to commit racketeering, bribery, document fraud, and property intimidation. Sunrise Development was hit with a cease and desist. Karen? She tried to flee. Caught at the airport with a suitcase full of cash and a forged passport in the name Karen DeVries. She didn't get far. Deputy Santos herself cuffed her at the gate. When asked if she had any last words, Karen just sneered and muttered, "This town will rot without me." But she was wrong. 1 year later, the Sullivan farm is thriving. We rebuilt the gate exactly how my grandfather had made it, with one small addition, a metal plate at the base engraved with the names of everyone who helped defend it. My chickens are happy. My produce stand has expanded. And the Red Gate Festival? Now it's an annual event. Thousands come. Not just locals, but people from across the state who heard the story and wanted to be part of something that mattered. A reminder that communities don't belong to corporations or tyrants. They belong to people. Sometimes I walk out to that gate at sunrise, run my hand over the wood, and think about all we endured. And survived. Karen was a storm, destructive, cruel, and loud. But storms pass. And roots? Roots dig deeper. Final words from the narrator, Tom Sullivan. They tried to buy us. Bully us. Burn us down. But they forgot what country folks know better than anyone. You don't pull up a tree by cutting the leaves. You dig at the roots. And the thing about roots? If they're strong enough, they grow back redder. And stronger. Every single Time. The night air was cool and still, the kind of calm that only settles over a place once justice has finally been served. Tom leaned against the red gate, arms crossed, a quiet smile tugging at the corners of his weathered face. He watched the chickens pecking peacefully in the yard, the flickering lights from Carlos's porch bouncing faintly off the barn, and the warm glow of neighbors sharing food and laughter down by the orchard where the Red Gate Festival bonfire still smoldered. Above the gate, the new sign read, "Welcome to Willowest Heights, home of the Red Gate Rebellion." Underneath that, established 1952, reclaimed 2025. He took a deep breath and let it out slow. No more Karen. No more fines. No more threats. Just community. Just legacy. Just home. Carlos walked up beside him again, beer in one hand, a stack of stickers in the other. "Guess what?" he said, grinning. "A documentary cruise coming next month. They want to film the whole story. Working title, Chicken Coup d'etat." Tom chuckled. "Tell them I charge by the egg." They clinked bottles one more time. From somewhere across the fields, a rooster crowed, bold, defiant, and just a little too loud. Tom smiled. "Sounds like freedom."